King County, Washington, in the early 1980s was a patchwork of damp suburbs, logging roads, and rain-slicked highway corridors where economic strain and a transient population masked a deeper horror. Beginning in 1982, the first bodies turned up in thickets and muddy riverbanks near the Green River and along Interstate 5, often shirtless, battered, or strangled, sending shock through Seattle, Kent, and Auburn. The victims, prostitutes, runaways, and teenage girls like 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield and 11-year-old Beverly Sammons, became a living ledger of loss, their families forced to navigate grief and public scrutiny. Forensic evidence, crude ligature marks, and similar patterns of decomposition linked some recoveries to a single perpetrator, but poor reporting and jurisdictional disputes between the King County Sheriff's Office and other agencies slowed progress. The media dubbed the unknown predator the Green River Killer, a label that captured the public imagination as headlines multiplied and the death toll climbed. Communities organized neighborhood watches. Counselors and detectives worked long hours. Mothers waited for missing daughters, and investigators wrestled with an increasingly gruesome pattern. The killer targeted vulnerable people along the I-5 corridor, dumping bodies where rain and mud could erase traces. That accumulating terror, bodies, evidence, and unanswered questions set a desperate tempo that would propel the next phase of the investigation. Starting in 1982, the body count began to climb as shirtless, strangled, and battered victims kept turning up in brush along the Green River and beside Interstate 5. Each new discovery deepened a citywide panic across Seattle, Kent, and Auburn. Local papers splashed lurid photographs, and the nickname Green River Killer hardened into a single, monstrous identity the public could fear and hate. By 1983, the King County Sheriff's Office and the Seattle Police Department, with help from the FBI, formed a multi-agency task force to pool detectives, crime scene teams, and forensic analysts. It was an uneasy coalition built from urgency and blame. Investigators struggled from the start. Witness statements were inconsistent. Many victims were transient or involved in sex work, and rain and time had degraded crucial evidence, turning scenes into forensic nightmares. DNA testing was still in its infancy in the early 1980s. Fingerprint matches were uncommon, and bitter jurisdictional disputes over who controlled leads and media briefings slowed momentum and fed public suspicion. Competing theories multiplied: a single mobile serial killer, multiple local predators, or crimes tied to drug networks, and each theory sent investigators in different directions. Detectives repeatedly interviewed men who lived or worked along I-5. Among them was Gary Ridgway, a Tacoma area truck painter who later became a person of interest and whom detectives interviewed repeatedly during the decade. Subscribe. Maybe the algorithm would have spotted patterns sooner. Families bore the brunt of the tragedy. Mothers and parents, including the families of 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield and 11-year-old Beverly Sammons, faced intrusive publicity, delayed answers, and mounting grief as funerals multiplied. Media hunger and police pressure produced false leads, mistaken identities, and tips that cluttered the investigation. But detectives persisted. They cataloged victims, timelines, and dump sites with grim determination. That effort gradually coalesced into a focused pursuit and set the stage for deeper forensic work, the turning point we will cover in Act 2. The investigation slogged through the 1980s and 1990s on a slow, grinding treadmill of missed leads and bruising missteps, allowing the Green River case to grow colder while new bodies appeared. Jurisdictional friction between the King County Sheriff's Office, the Seattle Police Department, and the FBI produced duplicated efforts, public confusion, and lost momentum as detectives argued over control of evidence and press briefings. Witness recollections frayed with time, and the transient lives of victims like Wendy Caulfield and Beverly Sammons left gaps in timelines and identity that predators exploited. Investigators repeatedly interviewed local men, including Tacoma truck painter Gary Ridgway. He was spoken to several times in the 1980s but never charged, a frustrating pattern that haunted families and detectives. Task force detectives such as Dave Reichert refused to let leads die. They preserved case files, maintained victim lists, and spent years subpoenaing records, re-interviewing witnesses, and following anonymous tips that often led nowhere. The emotional toll was relentless. Mothers attended funerals with unanswered questions. Siblings filed missing persons reports that gathered dust in cold case drawers, and public outrage simmered as the body count rose. The turning point did not come from a dramatic arrest, but from patient science. In the 1990s, forensic DNA profiling improved dramatically, and PCR amplification and STR analysis started to allow testing of minute, degraded samples. Cold case units reopened boxes of evidence, re-examined ligatures, clothing, and biological stains, and sent samples to federal labs. Those laboratory advances produced the first definitive genetic links in years, narrowing suspect pools and turning decades-old grime into prosecutable material. By the turn of the century, retested samples and fresh DNA matches rekindled hope and laid the forensic groundwork that pushed the case into its decisive phase. By the late 1990s and into 2002 and 2001, the investigation shifted from frustration over manpower shortages to relentless forensic refinement. Detectives reopened boxes of grotesque evidence, ligatures stained with decomposed blood, torn clothing, and microscopic tissue fragments taken from bodies dumped along the Green River and Interstate 5. Federal and local labs applied newer STR and mitochondrial DNA techniques to samples that decades earlier had been biologically voiceless, and those amplified profiles began to converge on a single male genetic signature. Task force detectives, led in part by Dave Reichert, alongside seasoned King County investigators, treated each positive match as a fragile victory. Every swab, every chain of custody form, every log entry had to be immaculate to survive courtroom scrutiny. Legal teams drafted narrow search warrant affidavits. Prosecutors combed detailed lab reports, and detectives rehearsed controlled interviews to avoid contaminating testimony. Surveillance teams quietly mapped Gary Ridgway's routines in Tacoma and along I-5, documenting travel, employment at a local painting business, and patterns that matched dump site geography. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses who had placed Ridgway near victims in the 1980s, corroborating timelines without relying on flawed memory alone. Tactical units coordinated arrest plans with evidence crews so any seizure would preserve the newly decisive DNA links. And the atmosphere tightened into a surgical pressure as every procedural checklist and forensic retest edged them closer to a breakthrough that would finally shatter a long-running nightmare. On November 30th, 2001, detectives moved quietly but decisively to arrest Gary Ridgway after re-examined evidence produced DNA matches that converged on his genetic profile. The mounting forensic case, including STR and mitochondrial DNA matches from ligatures, clothing, and microscopic tissue, was carefully authenticated and presented to prosecutors until charges followed. Ridgway was indicted and, on November 5th, 2003, pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder in King County Superior Court. His plea spared him the death penalty in exchange for full confessions, cooperation in locating victims' remains, and a waiver of appeals. In court, Ridgway admitted strangling many victims and described leaving shirtless, battered bodies in muddy thickets and along riverbanks. Task force detectives, including Dave Reichert, watched as decades of forensic work translated into sworn admissions. Family members reacted with a raw mixture of grief, relief, and fury. Some wept when remains were recovered. Others denounced the deal. The legal resolution closed an era of terror along the Green River and Interstate 5 corridors and pushed the case into a long, painful aftermath. In 2003, Gary Ridgway accepted a plea deal that removed the death penalty and left him serving multiple life sentences without parole. As part of that bargain, he cooperated with investigators to locate numerous victims, a grim recovery that gave some families answers after decades of uncertainty. The case also forced major changes in forensic practice. Old evidence was re-examined with STR and mtDNA testing, Police created dedicated DNA cold case units. Chain of custody rules were tightened, and formal interagency task forces became more common. Families had mixed outcomes. Some found closure when remains were identified, while others protested the deal because it foreclosed capital punishment and left questions about the true number of victims. Ethically, the plea exposed a real tension between securing confessions and achieving full accountability. Socially, the case reshaped policies on missing persons, strengthened victim advocacy, and changed how communities think about transient populations and long-term healing. The Green River investigations altered public awareness and forensic standards, and they leave a hard question: is closure worth compromising ultimate justice?